So a real basic principle when you're handling animals is when they voluntarily cooperate with the things that we want them to do, you're going to have very low fear stress. When you force animals to do things, the stress hormones go sky high, the cortisol be sky high, the lactate acid and glucose gets sky high, and you don't have those physiological changes. You handle animals quietly. Now there's two big things that I've worked on over the years. Been around for about 35 years now. I've worked on designing equipment. And equipment design is really important, but it's only half the equation. I have found that people often want the thing more than they want the management. Okay, we're going to buy this new milking parlor. That's going to make my dairy, like magic. Yes, it's great to have the new milking parlor. But let's say I had a choice. What would I rather have? Would I rather have superb management and maybe just adequate equipment? Not terrible equipment, but just adequate equipment. Or would I rather have the state-of-the-art milking parlor with bad management? I'll take the adequate milking parlor with the superb management. Equipment's got to at least be at the adequate level. And people are always looking for the magic thing. Some magic supplement, a drug, okay, an organic, there's certain medications you're not supposed to be using, but they're always looking for some magical thing that's just going to instantly solve their problem. When really what you need to be doing is management. Now, Wendy Fulwider was my student at Colorado State, and she did a big survey and got several big surveys, got them published in the Journal of Dairy Science. She visited 113 dairies, and she looked at different bedding types for freestall barns. And since these cattle didn't get to go out on pasture at all, they had a lot of hawkweeds, lots and lots of them. But the thing that was really interesting in this study was the difference between the good managers and the bad managers. And the good managers had like practically zero for swollen legs. The bad managers had a lot of swollen legs. There was a big difference in the management. First, the poorer designs of the beds were worse. The rubber mats were worse than the sand, no question in that. The water beds are kind of a close second. But even the worst bedding system, you really managed it well, you narrowed that gap. And so, first 10 years of my career, I thought I could fix it all with equipment. Now I realize I can only fix about half of it with equipment. Now there's some things that are very important that I've got to fix with equipment. I've done a lot of work with feedlots, and boy, you've got to have pen slope or you're going to have mud. It's that simple. Well, about 10 years ago, I worked on implementing auditing of animal welfare at the large meat plants. And I used a very simple scoring system. What's good handling? What's proper procedures? Well, one person's idea of proper handling would be somebody else's idea of torturing. So I made 5 simple scores to evaluate these plants. Percentage of cattle stunned on the first shot. You don't make 95%, you fail the audit, period. You've got to make your numbers. It's just like traffic rules. Get them all dead, it has to be all of them. You're only allowed more than one animal out of 100 falls, 1% fall. More than that falls, you fail the audit. And how many animals vocalize and bellow and squeal when I'm handling them, when I'm putting them up the chute and in a stun box? That has to be no more than 5%, period. Now, when we first started out, I went into plants so horrible, they had 75, 100% of the cattle bellowing. Now, if you get over 5%, you're going to fail the audit. Works great, pigs and cattle. Now, we do have a species difference here on sheep. The problem that we got with sheep is you can torture the poor things and they don't tell you. When the lambs are and baaing, that's separation anxiety. They all scream their little heads off when they're separated from mama or their mates. But you can do terrible things to sheep and they don't tell you. So the vocalization score doesn't work on sheep, but it works really well on cattle and pigs. Now the thing is, these are all outcome measures. I'm not telling you how to build a plant or what kind of equipment to use, but you've got to achieve certain outcomes. It's what's called an animal-based outcome. Now one of the biggest findings that we found when we collected baseline data for this, and then our baseline data was awful. 1996, I did a baseline survey. Only 30% of the plants could shoot 95% of the cattle on the first shot. And you know what the problem was? They never maintained the equipment. They simply did not take care of the equipment. There was just no maintenance. Now that's way over 90%. Now the good news is that most of the plants were able to get into compliance without building a whole lot of expensive things. Out of 75 plants, only 3 had to do big, huge, expensive things. Other ones we fixed with non-slip flooring, repairs, a lot of repairs, changing lighting, adding lights, because they're very sensitive to lighting. They don't like going into the dark, and putting up solid panels where they could see vehicles and conveyors and things like that. Put some shields up for people to stand behind, a few things like that. We ought to fix most of the places. Now the other thing is the attitude of management. There were 3 places where plant management had to be fired. Another issue that often comes up is big versus small. Well, what I found is the variable is not big versus small, it's badly managed. Understaffed, overworked people, badly managed operation. That's where you're going to have a problem. But these are, the other thing on this way of evaluating it is these are things I could directly observe. There's a tendency on a lot of auditing. I've seen a lot of stuff out there where they're turning it all into a paperwork audit. I don't want to be getting, grade A on paperwork, and then I've got, 25% lame dairy cows, or I've got dairy cows with lice all over them. That's certainly not going to be very good animal welfare. So what are some of the really key things you're going to look at, on a dairy? Well, for organic, you've got to have your pasture access. So what's pasture? There's a point when a piece of ground no longer is a pasture. I'll recommend that it's got to have at least 75% of the ground's got to have some plants with a root system on it. As I drove in here this morning with Wendy, we went by a dairy and it had a mud lot with a little bit of grass on it. Somebody might try to call that a pasture. Lameness. How many lame cows have we got? How many skinny cows have we got? Wendy's come up with a great, plastic card that's got lameness scoring, skinniness, dirt scoring, hawk lesion scoring. The other thing we got to look at, and I think this is something where organic's really going to have to face up to this issue, and that is internal and external parasites. There are some people where they're tolerating way too much of that. Whole piles of bald spots, not okay. This is something that I call bad becoming normal. When I first started out, dairies had like 2% of the dairy cows lame. Now the national average is 25%. How did they get into a mess like that? That's what I call bad becoming normal. You see, it slowly got worse, and people didn't realize that it was slowly getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And we got to make sure that we don't let that happen with, lice and parasites and things like that. Now, again, I'm going to measure the outcomes. And then there's a few things where you have some practices you ban, like there's certain substances you're not allowed to use. So you have a list of things that are banned, growth promotants, hormones, things like that. Not allowed to use those things. Artificial pesticides, that's just stuff you ban. That's easy standard to write. And then you have a few input standards, like some stocking density requirements for different kinds of housing. Ammonia levels in buildings. If they're indoors, in a building, if it gets over 25 parts per million, somebody needs to fail an audit really fast, because that's the OSHA safety limit for ammonia. 10 parts per million is where it ought to be. Now, if they're outside or if the building's open, you're not going to have a problem with that. But boy, I've been in some buildings, the ammonia would just like take your head right straight off. So those would be some examples of some input requirements. And I've trained a lot of people on how to do auditing. I've been working with Wendy on some of her farm visits. We've got to have things that are simple and things that people can actually do. Because lots of times you only have a day and a half workshop to train the auditors, and if it's or the assessors or whatever you want to call them, the certifiers. And it needs to be very clear what's required, like traffic rules. It's very clear. Stop signs mean stop. They're now got a sign up in Colorado that says 75 miles an hour means 75 miles an hour. They just had that up just the other day on these lighted billboards I have up over the highway. Now, if you're interested in some of the work I got done on animal behavior, I have a website, Grandin.com. It's just my last name. And I haven't been over to the bookstore yet, but I hope they'll have my 2 main animal books. And I hope they've got some copies of Humane Livestock Handling and then Improving Animal Welfare, a Practical Approach. I hope those books are over there. What I think we'll do now, I just want to open it up for some really good questions and discussion, because that's some of the most interesting stuff. And if nobody has a question, I'm going to pick somebody. So, you better have a question.
In my area, the vets are building these mini arenas, and when you have an issue with a critter, they want you to bring them in.
What are you building an arena? What do you mean by an arena?
Building a facility to hold the critters.
Okay, so in other words, you have an animal that's sick,
Yeah,
they want you to bring it in.
yeah. What's your
Well,
thinking on that?
sometimes you need to do that, it depends upon what's wrong with it. I'd have to find out exactly what they're doing. There's some situations where they do need to be brought in, and others, they might not be. Some of that's a matter of professional judgment. That's something I'd like to talk to you about afterwards, because I gotta learn more about it and exactly what they're building and doing. There's definitely some situations where a cow would need to be taken into the vet, and there's other situations where she wouldn't.